I'm not taking care of that old witch after this is over, my daughter-in-law whispered at my son's funeral, loud enough for me to hear every single word. I stood beside Michael's casket with my black gloves folded neatly in front of me, staring at the white lilies arranged around him while the organ music echoed softly through the chapel. For a moment, I honestly thought I had imagined her voice. Grief does strange things to the mind. It bends sound. It distorts reality. But then I heard the uncomfortable silence that followed, the kind people create when they hear something cruel and decide pretending not to notice is easier than defending you. Vanessa adjusted the pearl bracelet on her wrist and leaned into one of her friends as if she had merely commented on the weather. The funeral director lowered his eyes. A woman near the second row cleared her throat awkwardly. No one said a word to me. Not one person. I kept my expression calm because Michael hated public scenes. Even as a little boy, he used to squeeze my hand whenever people argued too loudly in restaurants. "Mom," he would whisper. "Everyone's staring." So I simply nodded at the pastor as if nothing had happened. My son lay in a polished walnut casket beneath soft chapel lights, wearing the navy suit he bought for our last Thanksgiving together. He was only 42 years old. 42. A lifetime should not fit inside a funeral program. The air smelled like roses, candle wax, and rain-soaked wool coats. Outside, February snow covered the church parking lot in a thin layer of gray slush, and people shuffled carefully across the sidewalk, holding paper cups of coffee to stay warm. I remember strange details from that morning. The crooked tie on Michael's college roommate. The faint lipstick stain on Vanessa's coffee lid. The fact that my right shoe pinched slightly near the heel because I had walked nearly 2 miles that week trying to quiet my thoughts after Michael died. Grief makes your mind cling to tiny things because the larger truth is too heavy to hold all at once. Vanessa stepped closer to the casket and dabbed carefully beneath her eyes with a tissue that remained perfectly dry. Her blonde hair fell in soft waves over her black coat, every strand carefully styled despite the weather. She looked beautiful, controlled, composed. People kept touching her shoulder and telling her how strong she was. Meanwhile, I stood 3 feet away feeling like a ghost at my own son's funeral. My husband passed away 11 years ago, and after that, Michael became the center of my world. We spoke every Sunday morning. He helped me shovel snow after winter storms. He fixed the loose cabinet door in my kitchen every time it came undone, even though I told him not to bother. But over the last 2 years, things changed slowly. At first, it was small. Missed phone calls, shorter visits. Holidays rushed through like obligations instead of celebrations. Vanessa always had a reason. A work dinner, a couple's trip, Michael feeling tired. I believed her because trusting your family feels natural until the day it becomes dangerous. The pastor began speaking about eternal peace and loving memories, but my attention drifted toward the back pew where Vanessa stood speaking quietly with a tall man I didn't recognize. He wore a charcoal overcoat and held a leather envelope tightly against his chest. Their conversation looked tense. Vanessa crossed her arms. The man shook his head once, firmly, before glancing toward me. Something cold moved through my stomach. Not fear exactly. More like the feeling you get when thunder rumbles far away before a storm reaches your street. A few minutes later, as guests slowly filed toward the fellowship hall downstairs for coffee and sandwiches, the man approached me carefully. "Mrs. Carter?" he asked in a low voice. I turned toward him, exhausted from hours of handshakes, and whispered condolences. Up close, he looked to be in his late 50s, with silver hair and tired blue eyes. "Yes," I answered softly. He hesitated before extending the leather envelope toward me. "Michael asked me to give you this personally if anything ever happened to him." My fingers tightened around my gloves. Across the chapel, Vanessa froze the moment she saw the envelope in his hands. And for the first time since my son died 3 days earlier, I saw genuine fear enter her face. The fellowship hall downstairs smelled like weak coffee, deli sandwiches, and melted candle wax from the memorial tables lined against the walls. People gathered in small circles speaking softly about Michael, as if lowering their voices could somehow make death less real. I sat alone near the window with the leather envelope resting unopened in my lap, while snow drifted steadily outside across the church parking lot. My hands would not stop trembling, so I wrapped them tightly around the paper coffee cup someone had placed beside me earlier. The coffee had gone cold nearly 20 minutes ago, but I kept holding it anyway. Across the room, Vanessa moved gracefully from table to table, accepting sympathy with practiced elegance. Every few minutes, she glanced toward me, toward the envelope. Each time her smile faded slightly before returning again. I noticed things about her now that I had ignored for years. The way she watched people before speaking, calculating what version of herself they needed to see. The way she touched someone's arm right before saying something emotional. Even her tears seemed carefully measured, appearing only when someone important was nearby. Michael used to laugh easily before he married her. He loved old baseball games on television and burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings because he always forgot to flip them in time. After Vanessa entered his life, everything became polished, structured, controlled. Their home always looked like a furniture catalog. Their conversations during family dinners became shorter, safer somehow, as if Michael had learned to avoid saying the wrong thing. At the time, I told myself that was simply marriage. Now I was no longer sure. Mrs. Carter? The silver-haired man stood beside my table again, his voice gentle enough not to startle me. I realized this is difficult timing, but Michael was very specific about the envelope. I looked down at the worn leather in my hands. There was no name written on it. No label. Just a brass clasp near the center that looked old enough to belong to another decade. "Who are you?" I finally asked. "Daniel Holloway," he answered quietly. "I handled some private financial matters for your son over the last year." Financial matters. The words settled heavily in my chest. Michael never hid things from me before. At least I used to believe he did not. Daniel glanced toward Vanessa before lowering his voice further. "Your son wanted you to have this personally. He was concerned certain documents might disappear otherwise." A cold sensation crept slowly through my stomach. Disappear? Before I could ask another question, Vanessa approached our table carrying 2 untouched cups of coffee. Her black heels clicked softly against the church floor. "There you are," she said warmly, setting one cup near me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I have been looking everywhere for you, Evelyn." She never called me Mom. Not once in 15 years. Daniel straightened politely. Vanessa immediately shifted her attention toward him. "And you are?" she asked. "Daniel Holloway." He extended his hand calmly. "An old business associate of Michael's." Vanessa shook his hand carefully while studying him the same way people inspect unfamiliar animals from a distance. "Well," she said after a moment, "today has been overwhelming for everyone." Her gaze dropped briefly toward the envelope still resting in my lap. "Maybe this conversation can wait." Daniel did not answer immediately. Michael disagreed, he said softly. The silence that followed felt sharp enough to cut through the entire room. Vanessa's expression barely changed, but I saw her fingers tighten around the coffee cup. A single drop spilled onto her glove. For the first time since entering the church that morning, she looked uncertain. Not grieving. Not exhausted. Afraid. And somehow that frightened me far more than the funeral itself. The drive home from the church took nearly 40 minutes because of the snow, though I barely remembered any of the streets between the chapel and my neighborhood. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in slow rhythm, while Michael's funeral flowers rested in the back seat beside the leather envelope. I kept glancing at it at red lights, as if it might suddenly explain everything on its own. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the late afternoon sky had already turned dark gray. Winter evenings in Ohio always seemed to arrive too early after a funeral. My house looked exactly the same from the outside. The white shutters Michael painted for me 6 summers ago. The porch swing my husband built before his arthritis became too severe. The small brass lantern near the front door flickering softly against the falling snow. But something felt different the moment I stepped inside. Colder somehow. Emptier. I hung my coat carefully beside the door and stood still in the hallway listening to the silence settle around me. No television. No footsteps overhead. No phone ringing with condolences anymore. Just the low hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the ticking wall clock Michael gave me for my 70th birthday. I carried the envelope into the living room and placed it gently on the coffee table beside a framed photograph of Michael at age 10 holding a fishing pole nearly taller than he was. He had caught absolutely nothing that day, but smiled so proudly you would have thought he won a tournament. My chest tightened at the memory. Grief arrived in strange waves. Sometimes sharp and sudden. Sometimes quiet enough to sneak into ordinary moments like setting down your purse or turning on a lamp. I walked toward the hallway to hang my funeral dress in the closet when I noticed something missing. I stopped immediately. The framed wedding portrait of my husband and me that had hung beside the staircase for over 30 years was gone. At first I thought perhaps I had moved it while dusting before Christmas. But then I looked closer. The nail still remained in the wall. The outline of the frame was still visible against the faded wallpaper. Someone had taken it down recently. My stomach tightened slowly. I moved farther into the house. Another missing photograph. Then another. The picture of Michael graduating college. Gone. The family portrait from our trip to Cape Cod 15 years ago. Gone. Only empty spaces remained where the frames had been. I stood frozen in the hallway trying to understand what I was seeing. Vanessa had stayed at my house twice during the past week while helping organize funeral arrangements. She had insisted she wanted to take care of things for me while I rested. I suddenly remembered how quickly she had volunteered to stay behind alone yesterday afternoon while I met with the pastor at church. A sound escaped my throat before I could stop it. Not crying exactly. More disbelief than sorrow. I walked back into the living room and sat down slowly beside the envelope. Outside, snow tapped softly against the windows while the furnace rattled to life beneath the floorboards. I stared at the brass clasp for a very long time before finally opening it with trembling hands. Inside rested several documents, a small silver key, and one sealed letter with my name written across the front in Michael's handwriting. Mom. Just seeing that single word nearly broke me. I touched the envelope gently with my fingertips, remembering all the birthday cards he used to send me every year even after becoming a grown man. Vanessa always preferred expensive gifts. Michael still believed handwritten notes mattered more. I opened the letter carefully, unfolding the paper as my heart pounded harder with every second. The first sentence stole the air from my lungs. If you are reading this, it means I ran out of time before I could protect you myself. My hands shook so badly, I had to place the letter flat against the coffee table before continuing to read. The lamp beside the sofa cast a soft yellow light across the paper while snow continued falling outside my living room windows. I could hear the old furnace humming through the hallway, the same sound Michael used to complain about every winter when he was a teenager. Mom, that thing sounds like it is fighting for its life. He would joke while stealing pieces of bacon straight from the frying pan on Saturday mornings. I closed my eyes for a moment at the memory before forcing myself to continue. I know Vanessa has been changing things around you slowly. The letter read. You probably tried to ignore it because that is who you are. But I need you to trust your instincts now, even if doing that hurts. My chest tightened painfully, changing things around me slowly. Suddenly, every uncomfortable moment from the past 2 years returned with painful clarity. Vanessa insisting Michael and I spend fewer holidays together because they needed couple time. Vanessa convincing him to sell his father's old fishing boat, even though Michael once swore he would keep it forever. Vanessa redecorating their house and quietly removing every family photograph that included me. At the time, each incident seemed too small to question, too petty. I told myself I was simply becoming one of those difficult older mothers who struggled to let go. Now I wondered if that guilt had been exactly what Vanessa counted on. I continued reading. 3 months ago, I discovered financial transfers connected to my business accounts that I did not authorize. When I confronted Vanessa, she convinced me there had been an accounting mistake. I wanted to believe her. But then other things stopped making sense too. A cold heaviness settled over me. Michael had built his consulting company from nothing after years of working 16-hour days and flying across the country for clients. He protected that business carefully because he always said it would eventually provide security for the entire family, including me, especially me. My eyes moved farther down the page. If something happens to me unexpectedly, do not sign anything Vanessa gives you without speaking to Daniel Holloway first. Do not leave your house voluntarily. And please know this, Mom. None of what happened over the last 2 years was your fault. I lowered the letter slowly into my lap and stared across the room toward the empty hallway where our family photographs used to hang. The silence inside the house suddenly felt heavier than before. Not peaceful silence. The kind that forms after something has been carefully removed piece by piece until only absence remains. I reached for the small silver key resting beside the documents inside the envelope. Tiny numbers had been engraved near the top. Safe deposit box. My stomach tightened again. Michael had hidden all of this while smiling through family dinners and reassuring me everything was fine. I thought about the last Thanksgiving we spent together. Vanessa spent most of the evening texting beneath the table while Michael barely touched his food. At one point, he looked at me across the dining room with an expression I could not understand at the time. Tired, worried, almost apologetic. "You should think about downsizing eventually, Mom," Vanessa had said casually while pouring herself another glass of wine. "A smaller place would be easier for you." Michael immediately changed the subject after that, but I remembered the silence that followed. The uncomfortable silence. The same silence I heard earlier today after Vanessa called me a witch at my own son's funeral. A sudden knock at the front door startled me so badly I nearly dropped the letter. My pulse jumped hard against my throat as I looked toward the darkened entryway. Another knock followed. Slow, firm, deliberate. I stood carefully from the sofa, clutching Michael's letter tightly in my hand. Outside, porch light reflected off the falling snow while a tall figure waited behind the frosted glass. And somehow, before I even opened the door, I already knew it was not someone coming to comfort me. For a few seconds, I simply stood there staring at the shadow behind the frosted glass, while my heart pounded so loudly it nearly drowned out the wind outside. The porch light flickered softly against the snow, casting long pale shapes across the front steps. Another knock came, quieter this time. Careful, patient. I tightened my grip on Michael's letter before finally unlocking the door. Daniel Holloway stood on my porch with snow gathered along the shoulders of his charcoal coat. His silver hair was damp from the storm, and he looked far older than he had at the funeral earlier that afternoon. Tired in a way that seemed deeper than simple exhaustion. "I apologize for coming so late," he said gently. "But after what happened at the church, I did not think you should be alone tonight." I stepped aside without answering. The cold air rushed briefly into the hallway before the door closed again behind him. Daniel removed his gloves carefully and glanced toward the empty staircase wall where the missing photographs had once hung. I watched his expression change immediately. Not surprise. Recognition. "She has already started," he said quietly. A strange numbness settled over me then. I no longer felt shocked by anything. Only tired. Daniel followed me into the living room while I placed Michael's letter back onto the coffee table beside the silver key. The lamp cast soft light across the documents inside the leather envelope, and for several seconds neither of us spoke. The furnace hummed softly through the floor vents while snow brushed against the windows in faint waves. Finally, Daniel lowered himself into the armchair opposite the sofa and exhaled slowly. "Michael contacted me about 8 months ago," he began carefully. "At first, he only wanted help reviewing some unusual transactions connected to his business accounts." I sat very still listening. Did he think Vanessa was stealing from him? Daniel hesitated before answering. "I believe Michael wanted very badly to convince himself there was an innocent explanation." That sounded exactly like my son. Michael always looked for kindness in people long after common sense suggested he should stop. When he was 12 years old, he once defended a classmate who had been secretly taking lunch money from other children because he believed the boy simply needed help. "Everybody deserves another chance, Mom," he told me back then. I used to think that quality made him special. Sitting there now in the silence of my living room, I wondered if it had also made him vulnerable. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Over time, the financial irregularities became harder to ignore. Transfers, missing records, properties being discussed without Michael's authorization. Then he discovered Vanessa had been meeting privately with a real estate broker. My stomach tightened immediately. "Real estate?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Your house." The words landed softly but felt heavier than anything I had heard all day. I looked instinctively toward the kitchen doorway where Michael used to stand every Christmas Eve stealing cookie dough while pretending I did not notice. This house held 40 years of my life. My husband painted every room himself. Michael learned to walk in the hallway upstairs. The thought of strangers wandering through it, measuring walls for furniture, made me feel physically ill. Michael confronted Vanessa after discovering the broker emails. Daniel continued quietly. According to him, she claimed she was only trying to prepare for the future because she believed you would eventually need assisted living care. Assisted living. The phrase sounded cold and polished, the kind of language people use when they want to disguise cruelty as responsibility. Suddenly, Vanessa's comments over the past year replayed inside my head with painful clarity. "This house has too many stairs for someone your age. You should think about simplifying your life. A retirement community might actually be fun for you." I had mistaken manipulation for concern because I wanted peace more than conflict. Daniel removed a folded document from inside his coat pocket and placed it carefully onto the coffee table beside Michael's letter. "There is something else you need to know," he said softly. I looked down at the paper. It was a printed email exchange dated only 3 weeks earlier. At the top of the page was Vanessa's name beside a sentence that made my entire body go cold. "Once Evelyn is moved out, we can list the property immediately." For several seconds, I could not look away from the email on the coffee table. The words blurred together beneath the lamp light, while the snowstorm outside grew heavier, coating the front windows in white. "Once Evelyn is moved out, we can list the property immediately." Such a simple sentence. Calm, professional, almost polite. And yet it carried the weight of betrayal more heavily than Vanessa's whisper at the funeral earlier that day. Because this had not been spoken in anger. It had been planned carefully in advance. Quietly, deliberately. I lowered myself back against the sofa cushions and pressed my fingertips against my temple. Suddenly the exhaustion inside me felt bone deep. "How long has she been planning this?" I asked softly. Daniel removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes before answering. "Longer than Michael realized." The room fell silent again except for the ticking wall clock near the kitchen doorway. Tick, tick, tick. I used to love that clock because my husband spent 3 weekends restoring it after finding it at an estate sale years ago. Now every sound inside the house seemed sharper somehow, as if grief had stripped away the soft edges of ordinary life. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Michael became suspicious after Vanessa started pushing him to restructure certain assets. She wanted quicker access to liquid funds, property transfers, new beneficiary arrangements. I stared toward the dark hallway while listening. Did Michael agree to any of it? Daniel hesitated carefully. Some of it, yes. He trusted her for a very long time. Of course he did. Michael loved completely. When he married Vanessa 15 years earlier, he defended her against every criticism anyone ever made. My sister once told me Vanessa smiled with her mouth, but never with her eyes. Michael became angry for days afterward. "You are being unfair, Aunt Carol," he snapped during Thanksgiving dinner. "Vanessa has done nothing but support me." At the time I admired his loyalty. Tonight that memory only made my chest ache. Daniel slid another document toward me across the coffee table. Bank statements, wire transfers, property inquiries. Most of it meant very little to me at first glance, but one date immediately caught my attention. 3 days before Michael died. "What happened here?" I asked quietly, pointing toward a transfer request connected to one of Michael's business accounts. Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. Michael canceled it himself less than an hour after it was submitted. A strange feeling moved through me then. Not panic, not even grief. Clarity, slow and cold, like sunlight appearing through winter clouds after a storm. Michael had discovered something before he died. Something serious enough to leave hidden letters, legal documents, and warnings behind. I looked down at the silver key resting beside the papers. "The safe deposit box," I whispered. Daniel nodded. "Michael asked me to make sure you accessed it personally if anything happened to him." I turned the key slowly between my fingers while memories kept surfacing one after another. Vanessa insisting on handling Michael's medications after. His heart condition worsened last year. Vanessa refusing to let me stay overnight at their house after his surgery because she claimed he needed quiet recovery time. Vanessa becoming irritated anytime Michael and I spoke privately for too long during family dinners. At the time, every explanation sounded reasonable, sensible even. That was what made manipulation so dangerous. It rarely arrived looking cruel in the beginning. Daniel stood slowly from the chair and walked toward the empty staircase wall where our missing family photographs had once hung. "You should also know something else," he said quietly without turning around. "Michael changed his will 6 weeks ago." My pulse quickened immediately. "Changed it how?" Daniel looked back toward me carefully. "He established protections specifically to prevent anyone from forcing you out of this house after his death." The room seemed to tilt slightly around me. For the first time all evening, I felt something stronger than sorrow moving beneath the surface of my grief. Vanessa thought she had already won. I remembered the confidence in her posture at the funeral, the calm way she accepted condolences while pretending to mourn, the certainty in her voice whenever she spoke about my future lately. Assisted living, downsizing, simplifying, as if my life could be packed neatly into cardboard boxes and donated furniture. Daniel checked his watch before speaking again. "The bank opens at 9 tomorrow morning. We need to get to the safe deposit box before Vanessa realizes what Michael left behind. Outside, snow continued falling heavily across the neighborhood, while the old porch lantern flickered against the darkness. And for the first time since my son's funeral began that morning, I no longer felt like the weakest person in the room. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael sitting alone somewhere carrying burdens he never allowed me to see while I stood nearby, believing silence meant peace. Around 4 in the morning, I gave up entirely and walked downstairs in my robe to make coffee. The kitchen felt painfully quiet without the sound of Michael raiding the refrigerator the way he always did whenever he stayed over. Even at 42 years old, he still wandered into my kitchen half asleep asking if I had any cinnamon rolls hidden somewhere. I stood beside the counter waiting for the coffee pot to finish brewing while snow continued drifting past the dark windows outside. The house no longer felt simply lonely. It felt watched somehow, as if every room held secrets I had missed for years. Daniel returned just after 8 the next morning, wearing the same charcoal coat from the night before. He looked exhausted too. Neither of us spoke much during the drive to the bank. The roads were lined with dirty snowbanks from the storm, and Christmas decorations still hung from several storefronts, even though January was nearly over. Ordinary life continued moving around us while my own world felt suspended somewhere between grief and revelation. The bank sat downtown inside an old brick building Michael once helped renovate years ago through a local business project. I remembered how proud he looked during the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Vanessa stood beside him smiling for photographs in a cream-colored coat, while I clapped from the crowd, holding a paper cup of hot chocolate. Looking back now, I realized she spent most of that afternoon watching the cameras instead of Michael. We entered through the revolving glass doors, and warm air smelling faintly of polished wood and printer ink rushed over us. A young woman at the front desk greeted Daniel immediately, then escorted us toward a private office near the rear hallway. Everything about the bank felt unnaturally calm. Quiet keyboards clicking, soft instrumental music playing overhead. The ordinary sounds of people managing mortgages and retirement accounts while my son's final warnings sat folded inside my purse. A branch manager named Cynthia led us downstairs to the vault. She spoke gently after hearing about Michael's passing and offered condolences in the careful tone strangers use when they do not know where to rest their eyes. I thanked her politely while gripping my purse tighter against my side. The vault door opened with a heavy metallic sound that echoed through the narrow hallway. Inside, rows of safe deposit boxes lined the walls beneath pale fluorescent lights. Cynthia located Michael's box quickly before stepping away to give us privacy. My fingers trembled slightly as I inserted the silver key Michael left for me. For a brief moment I could not breathe. Then the lock clicked open. Inside rested a thick manila folder, a flash drive, and another sealed envelope with my name written across the front in Michael's familiar handwriting. Beneath those items sat several photographs, turned face down. Daniel quietly removed the folder first while I stared at the envelope. "Mom," the front read in blue ink. "Please forgive me for not telling you sooner." My chest tightened painfully again. Daniel opened the folder carefully, and his entire expression changed within seconds. "What is it?" I asked softly. He looked up slowly. "These are copies of property transfer requests connected to your house." A cold heaviness settled over me. Daniel continued flipping through the documents one page at a time. "Vanessa attempted to initiate a conservatorship review 6 weeks ago." I stared at him without understanding at first. "A conservatorship?" My voice sounded small even to me. Daniel nodded grimly. "She was trying to establish legal authority over your financial and medical decisions by claiming cognitive decline." The room suddenly felt too bright, too narrow. I gripped the edge of the metal table to steady myself while memories crashed together violently inside my mind. Vanessa insisting I forgot conversations that I clearly remembered. Vanessa correcting me loudly during family dinners over small details that never mattered. Vanessa repeatedly mentioning my age whenever friends were nearby. At your stage of life, stress can really affect memory. "You probably just forgot, Evelyn." Tiny comments. Constant comments. Carefully planted like seeds over time. My stomach turned. Daniel reached for the photographs at the bottom of the box and slowly turned the first one over. The air left my lungs immediately. Vanessa stood smiling beside a man I recognized from Michael's company holiday party last year. They were sitting together at an outdoor restaurant, leaning close across a table with wine glasses between them. The timestamp printed in the corner showed the photo had been taken 2 months before Michael died. For a long moment, I could not speak. I simply stared at the photograph while the fluorescent lights inside the vault buzzed softly overhead. Vanessa sat across from the man with her hand resting lightly beside his on the restaurant table, smiling in a way I had not seen at Michael's funeral. Relaxed, carefree, alive. The man beside her was Thomas Grayson, one of Michael's senior business partners. I remembered him clearly from company events because he always complimented my homemade pies during holiday dinners and called me Mrs. Carter with old-fashioned politeness. Looking at the photograph now made my stomach twist painfully. Daniel quietly set the picture back onto the table. "There are more," he said softly. I closed my eyes briefly before nodding. Additional photographs followed. Different restaurants. Different dates. One showed Vanessa and Thomas leaving a downtown hotel lobby together carrying shopping bags while laughing about something outside the frame. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing scandalous enough for television crime shows. But intimate in a quieter way. Familiar. Comfortable. The kind of comfort married people recognize immediately because they know exactly what it looks like when affection shifts elsewhere. My throat tightened. Michael knew. Somehow my son had discovered all of this while still trying to protect everyone around him from the fallout. Even me. Especially me. Daniel handed me the final sealed envelope from the safe deposit box. "I think he wanted you to read this privately," he said gently. I nodded and opened it carefully with trembling fingers. Inside was a single folded page written entirely in Michael's handwriting. "Mom, if you found the photographs, then I need you to understand something clearly. I did not leave because of shame. I stayed because I was trying to fix things quietly before anyone got hurt." My vision blurred instantly. I pressed the paper closer beneath the bright vault lights and kept reading. Vanessa and Thomas became close during business travel last year. At first they denied everything. Then Vanessa admitted she felt trapped in our marriage and frustrated by my health problems slowing down the company. A painful ache spread through my chest. Michael had developed heart complications nearly 18 months earlier after years of stress and nonstop travel. He rarely complained about it, but I noticed how tired he became afterward. The long business flights stopped. The late-night work calls became shorter. Even his laugh sounded weaker sometimes, as though exhaustion lived permanently behind it. I wanted a peaceful separation, the letter continued. But when Vanessa realized how much control she could lose financially, everything changed. She began pushing aggressively to restructure assets and isolate you from legal decisions involving the house. I lowered the paper slowly into my lap. Isolate you. The phrase echoed heavily inside my mind because suddenly every small humiliation from the past year made sense. Vanessa scheduling family dinners without telling me until the last minute. Vanessa correcting my memory in front of guests. Vanessa casually joking that I should stop driving after sunset because older people became confused more easily at night. Tiny cuts. Constant cuts. Not enough to sound cruel individually. But together they formed something deliberate. Daniel remained silent while I gathered myself. The vault suddenly felt colder than before. Michael changed the will after discovering the conservatorship paperwork. He explained quietly. "Your son placed the house into a protected trust 6 weeks ago. Vanessa cannot sell it. She cannot remove you from it. And she cannot access the funds Michael reserved for your care." I stared at him in disbelief. "She does not know?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "Not yet." A strange calm settled over me then. Not happiness. Certainly not victory. Just clarity. For months, maybe years, Vanessa had been arranging pieces around me like furniture in a room she intended to redesign. She believed age made me weak. Grief made me confused. Loneliness made me disposable. And perhaps until this moment, she had been partly right. Because I spent too long apologizing. For existing instead of noticing what was happening around me. Daniel carefully returned the documents to the folder before looking directly at me. "Vanessa invited several family members to dinner tomorrow evening," he said. "Apparently, she intends to discuss your future living arrangements." I almost laughed then. Not because anything was funny, but because suddenly I understood exactly what kind of performance Vanessa planned to stage. Concerned widow. Compassionate daughter-in-law. Difficult elderly mother who needed guidance for her own safety. I folded Michael's letter carefully and placed it back inside my purse beside the photographs. Then I looked up at Daniel for the first time since entering the vault. Good, I said quietly. I think it is time I attend dinner too. The dinner invitation arrived less than 2 hours after Daniel dropped me home from the bank. Vanessa sent it through a family group message filled with soft words and carefully arranged concern. I think it would be healing for all of us to gather after such a difficult week. Healing. I stared at the message while sitting alone at my kitchen table beneath the warm yellow light Michael installed for me 3 winters ago, because he said older eyes deserved softer lighting. The coffee in my mug had gone cold again. I seemed to forget drinking it lately. Outside, snow slid slowly from the porch roof in heavy clumps while evening settled across the neighborhood. For the first time in days, I no longer felt lost inside my grief. Hurt, yes. Exhausted, certainly. But not helpless. That feeling had disappeared somewhere between the bank vault and Michael's final letters. I arrived at Vanessa's house exactly at 6 o'clock the next evening, wearing the dark blue wool coat my husband bought me for our 40th anniversary. The front yard lanterns glowed warmly against the snow, and through the dining room windows I could already see relatives gathered around the table, holding wine glasses and speaking in low voices. Vanessa opened the door almost immediately, surprise flashing briefly across her face before her polished smile returned. "Evelyn," she said softly, "I was not sure you would feel up to coming." I met her eyes calmly. Neither was I. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and expensive candles. Michael's favorite jazz record played quietly somewhere in the background, though I doubted Vanessa even remembered it belonged to him. Family photographs still lined the hallway walls, but I noticed something immediately. Every recent picture featuring me had been removed. Only Vanessa and Michael remained now, smiling from vacations and holiday parties like a carefully edited version of history. Several relatives greeted me awkwardly as I entered the dining room. My sister Carol squeezed my hand tightly. Thomas Grayson sat near the far end of the table, pretending not to recognize me from the photographs in the vault. Vanessa moved gracefully between guests, refilling glasses and touching shoulders with gentle sympathy, performing grief with the same polished control she brought to everything else. Dinner passed slowly beneath layers of careful conversation. People discussed weather forecasts, funeral flowers, travel delays from the snowstorm. No one mentioned Michael directly for very long. His absence sat at the center of the table like another silent guest everyone feared acknowledging too openly. Finally, Vanessa folded her napkin neatly beside her plate and looked toward me with practiced concern. "There is something important we should discuss as a family," she said softly. The room quieted immediately. I rested my hands calmly in my lap and waited. Vanessa inhaled carefully before continuing. "Michael worried deeply about Evelyn living alone after his passing, especially with the size of the house and the stairs." There it was. The performance. Gentle voice. Concerned widow expression. Soft language hiding sharp intentions underneath. "I have been researching several wonderful retirement communities nearby," she continued. "Places with full medical support, social activities, transportation services. Somewhere safer for this next stage of life." My sister Carol stiffened beside me. Across the table, Thomas lowered his wine glass without speaking. Vanessa continued anyway. "The truth is, staying alone in that house simply is not realistic anymore." I noticed then how confident she looked. Certain. She truly believed the story had already been decided for me. Slowly, I reached into my purse and removed Michael's final letter along with the trust documents Daniel prepared earlier that afternoon. Vanessa's expression shifted almost instantly. Tiny changes. A tightening jaw. A pause too quick for anyone else to notice. "Actually," I said quietly, "Michael made his wishes very clear before he died." The room fell silent. I placed the documents carefully onto the dining table beside the candlelight. "My son created a protected trust 6 weeks ago, ensuring that I remain in my home permanently." Vanessa stared at the papers without moving. "There must be some misunderstanding," she said after a moment, though her voice no longer sounded steady. "No," I answered softly. "There is not." Then I slid the photographs across the table toward Thomas. His face lost all color immediately. Around us, silence spread heavily through the dining room while relatives exchanged confused glances. Vanessa looked at the photographs only briefly before turning toward me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger. Not grief. Exposure. The mask had finally slipped. I folded my hands calmly in front of me and looked directly at her. "Michael knew far more than you realized. No one spoke after that. The jazz record continued spinning quietly in the next room, while snow fell beyond the dining room windows. And for the first time since standing beside my son's casket days earlier, I no longer felt invisible.